Hey there, statistics class. Hope that Ed Performance test went just fine. In this lecture, I want to talk about what's called experiment design and how to determine what you're trying to measure, who you're going to select, what are your subjects, and what are the methods for conducting and getting that information. So we've already mentioned census. We haven't really talked about simulations and studies. We're going to get into that more. And some of these other terms you're probably very familiar with from science. When we talk about control groups and placebo effects, then we're going to look at some of the advantages and errors, potential pitfalls of using these methods. As you go through this lecture, if there's something you need more time to copy down or whatnot, just pause the video and record what you need. So basic guidelines for planning a study. First of all, identify the group, the population you're trying to look at, and then really take a look at the variables that you can get from that group. So again, I was measuring students in the 5th period class across the school. I was just trying to get general information about the number of cars, their whatever, what class they're in, just getting that kind of general information. Can you get information from everyone, or do you have to take a sample? And if you're going to use a sample, hopefully it's a representative sample. You have to consider, am I allowed to do what I'm trying to do? There's a lot of rules regarding privacy and how you handle information, like FERPA, school rules, etc. So keep in mind that as we play around with these things in the real world, there's much bigger ramifications. Can I actually do this legally and whatnot? Then you go get your data, and finally when you get all your data, you compile it, you bring it back, and you process it, and you run the statistics. And that's what we're going to talk on later on in our throughout our course. And then finally, just like in any scientific experiment or study, you record what you found in any anomalies, potential errors, so that way other people who are looking at your study can say, oh, they have considered this, or this is an area for improvement. As I mentioned in class the other day, a census uses measurements from the entire population, and a sample is only part of that population. Now, whether you use an observational study or an experiment, there are a number of reasons for doing both. Observational studies are things that you're not going in and adding variables. You're just comparing two different things. And a classic example of this is in ecology. You're going to look at the wildlife in the Brazilian tropical rainforest, and you're going to compare that to the wildlife in the Papua New Guinea tropical rainforest. You're not going to add anything to the mix. You're not going to try to control things. You're just observing and collecting data. That's different than an experiment where you're trying to control all the variables except one, and that is your treatment, something that you're going to add. So you can have a treatment group and a control group. And I'm sure a lot of you are really familiar with this idea of a control group. Now, one of the pitfalls of this, especially when it comes to medicine and education, is this idea of a placebo effect. And so what a placebo effect is when people think that whatever they're doing is enhancing or making this result. And you see this a lot in medicine. I've definitely seen it in education. So it's really important to be able to identify that placebo effect. So that's one potential error in an experiment. So again, the control group might get a placebo. The treatment group does not. They get the true medicine, so to speak. And you're comparing the results of the two to figure out, oh, well, is it just a placebo effect, or does the drug or the treatment have a true effect? Now, there's another term here called double blind, and that refers to error from the person performing the experiment. So error from the experimenter. I might have spelled that wrong. But what that means is the experimenter is treating the subjects differently. And so a double blind means the experimenter doesn't know who's getting the treatment and who's getting the placebo. And that's a way to truly randomize the experiment. So what that's doing is saying, hey, here's my group of people. Of these people, some of them are going to get treatment, some of them are going to get a placebo, and the experimenter doesn't know who's getting which until after the fact, and then they can do the inferential statistics from that. So here's an example of chest pain. And so this has been a long issue in America and throughout the Western world of heart disease and whatnot. And so there was a study conducted with drilling holes in people's heart. Now, some of your parents might want to consider this. I don't know. Hopefully everybody's healthy, but heart problems are an issue. Well, what they did was they took a large group of volunteers who were having untreatable chest pain, and then they sedated the patients, but they were still awake. So the idea was these patients with chest pain were then randomly assigned into two groups, and some of them were given a treatment, and some of them thought they were given a treatment, and then they're comparing the pain relief. Well, what's so interesting it was those in the placebo group who didn't have the treatment felt better. And this, of course, they had to really look at this and figure out, well, what's going on here? Obviously, there are other things at play besides the holes in the heart. And so we're going to talk about this in a second. Now, the real question, going back to the idea of observation or experiment, is it ethical to put holes in people's heart who don't have chest pain? And the answer is, of course not. You wouldn't start drilling people with holes, just like you don't give people cigarettes to test the effects of tobacco, right? So in an experiment, you're going to either take people that already have something, or it's going to be a situation that's ethical. You're not going to do something dangerous. When you're looking at something that has risks, typically you're doing an observation. So you're not going to add something risky to someone who is otherwise safe. So it's really hard to control all the variables in an experiment. So often what we do is we block people. We say, hey, okay, those of you who have smoked for the past 10 years, we're going to put you in one group, right? Because we know that's another variable, but there's other lifestyle things that might go with that. And then within that group, hey, Ms. Wagner, what we're going to look at is we're going to do random samples within that block. Okay, go back to this control group. So this idea of the control group having results that are from maybe a placebo or something, well, what's interesting is there are unknown variables that might be causing the change. And those variables are called lurking variables. All right? Confounding variables may be ones that seem to have an influence, but don't actually have an influence, such as the laser treatment. Maybe the laser treatment, oh, people have improved, but they improved more when they thought they had a laser treatment. So ways to eliminate those things, again, we talked about randomization, right? Mixing people up so we don't know who's getting what and comparing results. And two, replication. Well, maybe there was an error in the study because a cold or flu went through the hospital the weeks they were doing it. When you replicate that study again and again, do you get the same results? And that's really a great way to identify if you've got lurking variables or confounding variables. I want to take a moment to switch to surveys. And so I did a survey here on the first day of school, and you guys just compiled it. Surveys are ways to get information, and it's just by asking them questions. There's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to this. Of course, the biggest advantage is it's much easier and less expensive. The disadvantages are things like, oh man, are they being honest? Right? Some people don't even know how much they weigh or how tall they are. So these are some major issues that arise when you're conducting a survey. Now right here is a term called Likert scale, and that's an example where you assign a number, like 4 if you feel really good about something, 1 if you feel really bad. So that way you can take a feeling and you can make it ordinal, right? So you can put those things in order. Take a look at this sheet, and it gives you a really nice understanding of what are some of the errors found in surveys, like non-response. Not everybody's going to pick up on it. Truthfulness. Am I answering it honestly? Faulty recall. I don't remember what I ate for breakfast. How many times did I eat potatoes last week? There can be a level of bias. I don't like to say strongly agree. I mostly agree. Or vague wording. How many people looked at that survey and said, do you mean hours in the whole week or just in the hours I'm in school? There's an influence from who's giving the interview. Oh, it's my friend, I'll be more responsive versus someone I don't care for. And this one's really interesting. Voluntary response. People that like to take surveys and give their opinion. That is a bias. I just have a few more slides here. And so, again, I already mentioned lurking variables and confounding variables. You might want to pause here and get these definitions into your notes. So again, lurking is a variable that there's nothing collected on but has influence. Two variables are confounded when they can't distinguish the effects of one or the other. And we'll practice these and you'll see really how they play out. So the last thing I want to talk about is how you collect your data. All right, and this is a really important thing depending on what your goal is. So surveys are often a great way to get information across a lot of variables because it's really easy to just get that feedback, put it in a spreadsheet, and process it and tally it. Of course, there are instruments, or not instruments, but errors that can come up. And big ones, there's a bell, are non-response bias, right? And voluntary bias. So you have to watch out how you get people is really important. And then when we look at observational studies, they are also more convenient than experiments because, again, experiments require control, setup, a lot of cost, replication. Observational studies are better in that regard, but still there are limitations to the amount of variables and information you can take. Last, of course, experiments. Time-consuming, expensive. Variables are limited, right? But again, we're looking for that replication, so you're getting consistent results time and time again. I hope this wasn't too dry, and I hope it was helpful, and I hope it gives you a sense of these various terms. Again, we need to have a good sense of this so we can move forward, and yeah. You have an assignment from this chapter. I will see you guys on Thursday, and go from there.